weekly update is going to start a little bit different. We're actually partway through this week already, and that's because we spent the first 3 or 4 days of the week filming with Christian for the 4x4 garage series that we're doing for Motor Trend. Got a pile of work done. This is the only time where making TV is kind of a hassle because I've got to get this truck done for Ultimate Adventure, and then we got to hit the road. And as much as I want to just like turn and burn and work on this thing, sometimes what happens is you have to wait until you can actually film. So you get to work so far, then you got to stop. So in the case of this truck, we can only work so far till Christian could get here. Christian's flying from San Diego. We filmed with him, but now we're finally done. We got everything we need to produce the 3 episodes, except for the finale, which is us showing up at Ultimate Adventure. So then what we do is take the truck, or what I do, take the truck all the way back apart, and then actually build, or finish build, the truck. So this is where I'm at right now. We basically have the rolling chassis is 100% done. I just have a few things I got to take care of. Got to change the front suspension spring pocket design. My original design is not going to work. Rear suspension's all done. You can see my plan to mount the spare tire up underneath the rear bed is going to work. Got my little Harbor Freight winch right there, basically pulls over this. I do want to move this tire just a little bit back in the chassis. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a piece of tubing right in here so the line actually pulls up just a little bit further. And then I went ahead and added this strap just to the bottom, just for extra safety, because you never know, that brake on that winch is probably not the best. So I added that strap, more than likely for safety when we're four-wheeling. I got the cage all done in the truck, pulled the window out, and then we've knocked the cage out. I am going to add some basically filler pieces to go down here to connect the cage to the A-pillar on both sides, and then I can go ahead, finish weld that, put the dash back in. Then the cab can be simply dropped back on the frame, then it's got to knock out the wiring, and then it should be good to go. At the same time, though, I got to finish the Bomber, because as soon as I get back from Ultimate Adventure, I've got to hit the rotor net. So what I'm doing is basically working on both projects at the same time. So if I'm doing something that's similar on the Bomber that I'm doing on the truck, I'll basically do it at the same time. So today what I want to do is I want to try to get all the axles completely welded out. Not too much welding actually to do on these, which should be pretty good. So I'm going to finish up those front spring pockets, and then I'm going to pull the front axle out, pull the rear axle out of the Colorado. I'm going to pull the front axle, rear axle out of the Bomber, set them up on the fab table, and do all the welding. So now that my spring mounts are finished up, these are basically buckets that hold the top of the coil. The bottom spring mount is actually from Artec Industries. It just makes it a lot easier to build them. It has a little tag to pick up the tail of the coil, and it has an integrated shock mount. Now I can start on the shock mounts. It took me a few minutes to figure it out and design what I wanted, but this is basically what I did. So just cut this shape out on the plasma table, and it's basically going to sit on top of that spring mount, and then the shock will just hang off the back side of it. When it comes to projects like this, when it comes time to choose shocks, you really have 2 options. So option 1 would be to simply do like super cheap shock. Just get any old part store shock and put it on there. But option 2 is to actually get a set of good shocks. So I have a great relationship with the guys at Radflow, and had them hook me up with some shocks. And so what I told them what I wanted was basically Jeep JT shock package to start with, because my front coils are Jeep JTs. So this is their JT shock package. The reason I like to actually run this type of shock in a project like this is that because this is, mystery vehicle, it's a tube chassis with a Colorado body with a whole bunch of cool parts on it, I can actually have that shock tuned. So I could take this thing out, get the shock tuned, take it apart, adjust the valving, change it. It has little piston adjusters on the piston, so I can tune it while I'm driving it. But if the shock is too stiff or too soft, I can actually tear it down and rebuild it. You can't do that with a part store shock. So if you are like mixing and matching a bunch of parts on a project and you want it to perform really well, the key is actually a really good set of tunable, rebuildable shocks. That way you can fine tune all of the suspension components later on. The spring will be the spring no matter what. Unless you're running coilovers, you're not going to change that spring rate. The spring rate is the spring. Later on, if you want to upgrade to coilovers, you could, but on a project like this, I'm sneaking up on what I think is the perfect package for Ultimate Adventure. So it's super simple. So just a coil spring in the front with a good shock, leaf springs in the back, and a very, very comfortable place to sleep. Thinking this time. Thinking. Okay, so now that's done, I'm going to go ahead and weld those on, and then I'll have shock mounts. Shock mounts, I just made about an 1/8-inch plate, and that'll be fine on a rig like this. If they were actually going to be holding up the rig, like if they were actually coilover mounts, then what I might do is I'd either make them out of something thicker, or I would add on some shear tabs to them. So what I would do is I would basically add on another tab in this area here, because the load on that coilover would be on this hole, basically trying to tear it off. So what I might do is I may double up the thickness of the plate right here. I'd probably also add a gusset here to keep this mount from twisting. But as I said before, the spring that's in this pocket is actually what's holding up the suspension. This is just a shock mount, so it should be fine. So now, while that cools down, I'm going to head back to the other side of the shop. I want to do, as I said before, I want to weld out all these axles today, and that means welding the 14 bolt on the back, welding this one on the front. Realistically, I made it to a 14 bolt in the chassis. I do need to adjust the pinion angle on this. And this one, probably the same. I don't think I have to pull it out from underneath the car. But the ones on the Bomber, I do. So I'm going to prep the fab table, get it ready, and then pull those out. So I got the Spidertrax rear axle out of the Bomber up on my little fab table here. The nice thing is there's really not a lot of welding that's going to go into this. Basically, I just have to weld these tabs to the center section, and then these tabs over here. There's no truss or bracing or anything additional like that. I will have to weld on the bearing cups now that I know that they're good. One thing, oh, and the reason I mentioned that truss is if I was doing a lot of welding along the top of this, like some sort of truss or something like that, what I'd want to do is I'd want to basically fixture this whole axle down onto this table, and that would prevent it from pulling. But I don't really have to do that because I'm basically just welding in this little section right here at the front of the axle and out here on this end. These two being in the center on this large section of the axle right here, it's not going to distort at all. I will run my alignment bar through the entire setup when I weld on these cups. And what I also like to do when I do that is I actually put one of my squares on here on the fab table as well, just to make sure that that's good and square as it goes. And I clamp the base of the axle down, and then we should be good to go. What I do with these cups is I'll do a root pass with the TIG, and then actually come back with the MIG, turn the gun up, and just give us like a nice big fat thing through there. One thing you do have to do whenever you're doing this kind of welding is you want to make sure that the tabs don't deflect while you're welding them. So you got two options. Sometimes I keep a garbage heim joint around just for doing this. I can't find mine right now. I don't know where I put it. So I went to my other option, which is what you do is you just basically make a sleeve. This is a piece of 1-inch DOM, and it is the exact same spread as these, actually plus a 1/16 of an inch. So what I'll do is I'll basically put it inside the tab, clamp the tab in place, and then when I weld it, with this being in there holding everything good, when it's done and cooled, then I can pull it out, and then I know that tab doesn't deflect. That's just how you keep those things from moving around while you weld. While I'm waiting for this side to cool and pull the actual spacer out, I'm going to go ahead and build my little gusset. I want to basically just bring a little gusset across the top of here. I don't think it's really needed, to be honest with you, because these link mounts aren't that tall, but I just think it'll kind of also just finish it off. I also should point out one nice thing. I actually just posted this on social, so you may have already seen this. On these open corner joints, it is really easy to get a lot of undercut on these. You can see when I set these up, I give myself just basically half of each piece of steel, just basically overlapping each other. When you weld that, it is very easy to put too much heat input into one piece of material. And what you'll end up there with is undercut. Now, undercut is basically where you've burned a bunch of that steel away, and then only a portion of the weld puddle has actually worked its way into that material, usually only about half. So if you can imagine, that's a piece of 3/16 inch plate. If we only welded half of it, well, then we've only welded 330 seconds of it, basically half of it. So you don't want to feed a lot of undercut into something like that. So the one nice thing about the Rebel is I can adjust the voltage trim on the machine. So voltage trim, basically the best way to describe it is just imagine it's the amount of wire that's going to be deposited into the weld, and they use this little picture to help you understand it. If you want a whole lot of heat input, like if I'm welding something really thick, like the bearing caps onto the end of knuckles, I'll actually weld it up into a lot of voltage trim. That basically allows that weld to almost dig in just a little bit deeper. But on those open corner joints, what I do is I roll it back to -9 worth of voltage trim, and that will just deposit more wire into those open corner joints, helps prevent that undercut, and just makes the welding of that a lot easier. Another trick that you can do to help with that is if you can get inside, if you can get to the inside of those open corners, weld that first, because what that will do is that will basically act as a heat sink for when you're welding. So that will allow the heat basically to penetrate into the weld that you've already deposited. It basically doubles the thickness of the steel basically where you're welding. So if you can get to the inside of those open corners, always weld those first and then weld the outside. Now, before I can weld this in, I need to finish welding in this big fill plug. I only put this little oval piece here just because when this was a big flat piece of steel, it just kind of looks silly. And now I realize it kind of looks like a handle, which is kind of cool. Or I could just use the engine crane to move the axle around if I wanted to. Maybe I'm going to pretend that's what it's for. But either way, really it was just put in there because I've been using that shape a lot on this truck, and it just kind of dresses it up a little bit and just keeps it from being one big giant flat plate. So now I'll finish TIG welding in the filler plug. By then this should be cool. I'll swap my basically spacer from this one to this upper link mount, and then I can weld it. And then I think we're done welding on this rear axle. So now the next weld out is the front axle for the Colorado build. It's just a simple 3-link. It should be a lot easier than the rear Spidertrax axle because there was actually more welding on that than originally my brain had thought. This is just like 3 brackets. I got to make 1 tab on the plasma table and then we'll be done. What I think I'm going to do is because of this bracket right here, it's a little tricky to get this on the stands because I want to put my stand basically right where this bracket is. So I don't really know. I may actually just, for now, leave it on its tires and wheels and weld it out like that. I think that's actually going to be the easier way to do this right now.